Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, Volume 2, page 12. Once Erickson hypnotized a man and gave him instructions for amnesia. When the man woke up, he said defiantly, "I can recall everything that you did with me." Erickson responded, "That's right, of course you can remember everything here in my office." Soon after that he asked the man to come with him to the waiting room to show him an article in magazine. When they got to the waiting room, the man looked puzzled and said, "Wasn't I supposed to have a session with you today?" Then, when they went back into the office, he remembered the session again. When someone is worried and upset about an upcoming event, you can say, "Of course you're worried about it now," and that will imply that they won't worry about it then, when it actually happens. If someone is concerned that when they rehearsed a new behavior in their mind, it took a lot of effort, you can respond, "Yes, of course, when you rehearsed it now for the first time, it took a lot of conscious effort." That implies that at some later time it will be unconscious and effortless. Understanding how something works is only the first step in making it into an ability. Like all things, actual practice is what we can make it part of your spontaneous behavior. Like all things, actual practice is what can make it part of your spontaneous behavior. Repeated practice can make the skill as automatic and unconscious as the way you generate language or drive a car. If you use the outline above to practice what you have learned, you can establish a basis for a fluent and unconscious skill. Contingent implication. When two events are linked together in someone's mind, and one of them occurs, that implies that the other event has also occurred. For instance, if someone believes that graduating from college indicates intelligence, then when that occurs, they will be convinced that they are intelligent. Whether that is true or not is another matter. This is particularly useful when someone has a problem that you know that you can solve easily, but you want to do more than just solve their problem. You want to create a more general attitude of optimism or willingness to take on life's challenge. That is particularly useful when someone has a problem that you know that you can solve easily, but you want to do more than just solve their problem. You want to create a more general attitude of optimism or willingness to take on life's challenges. If someone congruently agrees that getting over a phobia would mean that they can make other changes, or that life would be worthwhile, then when the first event occurs, the second is implied. There may be no logical linkage between the two events, but if they have congruently agreed to the contingency in advance, it will be effective in reorienting them. You can create this kind of contingency overtly by saying something like the following. You have had this problem for years, and you have tried everything to overcome it. Now, if you could solve this problem to your complete satisfaction, that would be proof positive, would it not, that you can change in the ways that you have desired for so long, and that your life can be worthwhile? If client contingently agrees, then when you solve that problem, it will convince them that life can be worthwhile. This is an example of what is often called generative change, in contrast to just solving problems, which is called remedial change. This kind of contingency can also be created covertly. For instance, Giorgio Nardone and Claudette Portelli use the following instruction as part of their work with clients, an instruction that can be used with any problem whatsoever. During the following weeks, I'd like you to ask yourself this question. Every day in the morning, question yourself, what would I do differently today, as if I no longer had my problem, or as if I had recovered from my problem? Among all the things that come to your mind, choose the smallest, most minimal but concrete thing and put it into practice. Every day, choose a small but concrete thing, as if you had already overcome your problem, and voluntarily put it into practice. Every day, choose something different. If the contingency is not clear, reread paragraph above to give yourself an opportunity to discover the contingent implication before reading on. During the following weeks, I'd like you to ask yourself this question. Every day in the morning, question yourself, what would I do differently today, as if I no longer had my problem, or as if I had recovered from my problem? Among all the things that come to your mind, choose the smallest, most minimal but concrete thing and put it into practice. Every day, choose a small but concrete thing as if you had already overcame your problem, and voluntarily put it into practice. Every day choose something different. So here contingent implication, it's not in the book, it's my opinion. Here contingent implication is that what would you do differently today as if I no longer had my problem, or as if I had recovered from my problem. So when you question yourself that thing, and you actually you find something, like find answer to that question, and you actually start doing that, it would imply that you have already solved your problem and recovered from it, because this is something you would do in case you have completely recovered from it and solved it, and you are doing it. It means that you have already recovered from it. So now I'm going to read further. Milton Erickson often used to talk about making a small change that would begin a snowball effect, creating a much larger change. However, people often make a small change and it doesn't snowball. They make some effort, resolution, or decision, but then backslide into their old behavior. What distinguishes a small change that will snowball from one that won't. There are a number of elements in this instruction that result in cascade of change. This instruction repeatedly uses an as-if categorization to create a make-believe world in which anything can happen, free of the constraints and limitations of the real world. This neutralizes any objections based on categorizations that the client may have about it being impossible, silly, stupid, etc. Within this as-if categorization, the instructions link the concrete behaviors in the client's mind with having recovered from the problem. Then, when the client actually does one of the concrete behaviors, that makes it real, taking it out of the as-if categorization. The contingency implies that it is equally real that the problem has already been overcome. Usually, this will occur entirely outside of the client's awareness. They will only notice that their lives are going better, or that their depression has lightened somewhat. There are several other very useful elements in this instruction. When the client is asked to choose from among all the things that come to your mind that they would do if they had recovered, that presupposes that many things will come to their mind. That creates the category, all the things that you would do if you recovered, associating each example in the category with all the others. Aggregate categorical scope. Each example in this category that they think of will direct them to think of what it would be like to have recovered from the problem. That focuses their attention repeatedly on the solution rather than the problem. And this will be true even if they don't do any of the things that they think of. Another way of describing this is that the client is told to repeatedly think about recovering from the problem every morning, and then to do a concrete behavior that validates the implied recovery. Since every morning begins with the implication of having recovered from the problem, that makes it likely that they will also think of it, unconsciously or consciously, at other times throughout the day. This instruction would not be nearly as effective if it were assigned in the evening, unless, perhaps, there was an explicit suggestion to do it in their dreams while sleeping. The client is told to choose the smallest, most minimal thing to do, in order to make the task appear easy to do, eliminating any residual objection or resistance. However, it really doesn't matter how small the task is, it will still create the contingency. If a small smile is an indication of happiness, it doesn't matter how brief it is. And since the client does this over a period of weeks, and each morning they have to choose a different smallest thing that they would do if they had recovered, each day they will have to choose a somewhat larger thing to do from those remaining on their list. If the client enlarges the list by including additional smaller things, that means that they will think of the solution even more often as they review this longer list of things in order to choose the smallest one. And if they are at all oppositional or rebellious, they may decide to do one of the larger things, giving them an opportunity to resist an element of the task, while complying with the larger task. If they do a larger thing, that is even better evidence for the implication that they have recovered. Furthermore, since each morning the client does something different in the category, what I would do if I had recovered, soon there will be a group of things that they have already done that indicate that they have already recovered, that negotiate that aggregate of experiences will become larger and more compelling each day, providing more and stronger evidence for the category recovery as time goes by. Both thinking of the actions that indicate recovery and doing them will act as prototype experiences that will sensitize them to when they do them spontaneously during the day. For instance, if smiling or laughing are two of the behaviors, and they find themselves smiling or laughing sometime during the day, they will tend to notice that they have spontaneously smiled or laughed instead of ignoring it. A spontaneous response will be even better evidence that they are recovering than a deliberate action. And if they refuse to do the task, they will still think of it every morning, perhaps even more than if they did it. Even thinking of the task will sensitize them to all the behaviors that would indicate that they have recovered from their problem, making it more likely than that they will notice them when they occur spontaneously. This instruction is a beautiful example of how to pack a host of implications and presuppositions into a task, most of which will be completely outside the client's awareness. When a task is well constructed, the harder the client tries to evade the task, the more effective the task will be. This kind of instruction will also work even when you understand the pattern. Pick some change that you would like to make and follow the instructions above, and you will find what a useful task it is. The instructions can be made more generative by rewording it so that it is not about problem, but about a positive outcome that would expand your creativity and resourcefulness, making you even more capable and evolved. Below is an even subtler example of contingent implication from the work of Milton Erickson. Now, this woman I saw just before I came here had her master's degree. She was an exceedingly intelligent woman with strong resistance to hypnosis. Her daughter was going to college, and it was a rather simple matter to enlist the daughter's interest. The daughter said to me, "You can hypnotize my mother, but you can't hypnotize me." My reply was, "I'd like to have you tell that to your mother." How many of you recognize what I said? I'd like to have you tell that to your mother. It is another way of saying, tell it to somebody else. I don't believe you. I asked her to tell it to her mother because I was rejecting her statement. So the girl told her mother, he can hypnotize you, but I don't think that I can be hypnotized. She was in a bind right then and there, and she never even recognized what I did. The girl very promptly went into a nice trance, and then I used her to demonstrate for her mother. Adds, what is the actual bind in this case? The editors speculate as follows. When Erickson said, I'd like to have you tell that to your mother, he was indirectly implying, I don't believe you. I can hypnotize you. Thus, the unconscious implication, and we know that unconscious implication is a most powerful method of suggestion. I can hypnotize you became associated with tell that to your mother. When the girl actually did tell that to her mother on a conscious level, she automatically and unconsciously evoked within herself the consequent associated implication, I can hypnotize you. She therefore very promptly went into a nice trance and served adequately as a demonstration subject for her mother. Of course, contingent implication can also be used in ways that are not so useful. People who promote firewalk seminars usually link the ability to walk on hot coals to the ability to break through all limiting beliefs and do anything. It is one thing to realize that you can go beyond a limiting belief and expand what you believe you can do. But it is quite another to think that you can do anything and not be harmed. Many beliefs have very useful productive functions. For instance, the belief that you take a substantial and unnecessary risk if you walk alone in rough parts of town late at night. I have written more extensively about this elsewhere. Recently, a woman who is very dedicated to the work that she is doing said to me with great emphasis, "This is my life." I immediately thought about what would happen if for some reason she was no longer able to do that work. Since the work is linked to her life, if the work stopped, the implication is that her life had also stopped, and she might become severely depressed or suicidal. I suggested to her that she use some other way of describing this, such as, I am deeply involved in the work that I am doing, to avoid the implication that lurk in equating her work with her life. Once I knew a volleyball player who had reached 50, well past the time when his body couldn't do all the things what it used to. He was depressed and a bit lost, wondering what he would do with himself, because now he could only coach. At one point he said to me, "Volleyball was my life." A friend of mine was repeatedly told by her mother, "Live your life before you get married," in what I'm sure was a well-intentioned wish that the daughter find out what was important to her individually before committing herself to a partner. It took the daughter a while to realize that her mother's instruction presupposed that she could only get married on her deathbed. It can be very useful to review your beliefs for any contingent implications that you may have made, to find out if you may want to revise some of them. Beliefs about large issues like life, happiness, etc. are particularly important to examine. I can only be happy in a relationship. If I become seriously crippled, my life would be over. That kind of thinking can easily transform an unpleasant event into a disaster, and it often results in depression and sometimes suicide. When this happens, it is possible to go back to before the time that decision was made and use a process developed by Richard Bandler called the decision destroyer to create an experience that will alter the problematic decision. Another way of changing this kind of implication is to explore generative solutions to any calamity now, so that you are prepared for it in advance. Imagine one by one all the kinds of disasters that you think are possible, and for each one ask the question, if that happened, how could I still live a life that would be satisfying and worthwhile? Make sure that your answer is a detailed plan and rehearsal for what you could do. And if you can rehearse several different options for each kind of disaster, that is even better. Nonverbal contextual implication. Nonverbal implication creates a scope that naturally elicits the desired response. It is very common in our everyday communication, particularly in the movements and expression of the face. The meaning of some nonverbal signals are culturally accepted and recognized, like shaking the head no, a beckoning hand gesture, or a frown that indicates displeasure. These signals that have agreed upon meanings are essentially nonverbal words that have digital meanings, like the gestures in American Sign Language. However, a frown can also mean concentration, puzzlement, or even gas in the stomach. So, some of these signals are still somewhat ambiguous. In the same way, a sign can imply boredom, but it can also mean relaxation or pleasure. Raised eyebrows can mean surprise or disbelief. But if the head is tilted forward, it usually implies a request for the other to respond. While if it is combined with a backward and sideways tilt of the head, it can imply a sexual innuendo. In face-to-face communication, there will always be many messages that are conveyed non-verbally. Some of them will be clear digital signals, while others will be ambiguous, and some will have meaning only in a particular context. Most of these nonverbal messages are unconscious, and we typically respond to them unconsciously as well. Since we usually respond to non-verbal implications unconsciously, we can use them to gracefully and indirectly elicit responses in others. For instance, think about what you do non-verbally when you want to end a conversation but don't want to do it overtly. You can defocus your eyes or look away briefly. Turn your body slightly away. Take a short step to one side. Lean back a bit. Run your fingers through your hair. End a sentence with a downward inflection indicating completion, etc. Most of these behaviors don't have distinct meanings that are culturally agreed upon, so they can only be understood using implication. One of the most difficult things about living in another culture, even if you know the language well, is that we can no longer read many of the nonverbal implications, leaving us uncertain about what is being communicated beyond the words that are spoken. Our possessions and surroundings are also scopes that are full of implications. A prominent clock on the wall at work implies the importance of time and its absence. A more relaxed attitude. The large desk, view window, and other furnishing in the boss office imply his importance, in contrast to the plain desk of a worker in a windowless cubicle. Our clothes imply volumes about our concerns, or lack of them, about neatness, comfort, style, wealth, lifestyle, and attitude. The larger context of your communication, your clothing, your nonverbal behavior, speech, pauses, tonal patterns, posture, gestures, etc. all contribute to the meaning of what you say and do. Contextual implication is always a factor in every moment of communication, whether you intend it or not. When you are aware of all these, you can make sure that all aspects of the context support what you want to accomplish. Once I knew a woman who was troubled by incessant critical internal voices, which disturbed her and kept her from fully attending to real-world events. Her spiritual teacher told her to get a job chopping vegetables in a Chinese restaurant, where vegetables are chopped very fast with a very large and very sharp knife. That is a context in which there is very strong motivation to pay close attention to the knife. It would be quite dangerous to be distracted by internal dialogue, which quickly diminished. A mother always spoke up and answered for her anorexic daughter when Erickson asked the daughter questions, and he wanted to hear what the daughter had to say. He told the mother to get out her lipstick and mirror and hold it very close to her lips, and notice how her lips tended to move when he asked the daughter questions. Putting on lipstick is a context in which the lips are kept motionless and therefore unable to speak. Erickson's instruction was much more graceful than asking the mother to shut up so that he could hear what the daughter had to say. You can also change someone's internal context. With several women who were incontinent due to spinal injuries and who wanted to regain control of their elimination, Erickson put them into trance and then had them experience sitting on toilet and then imagine the bathroom door opening and a strange man's face appearing, eliciting an involuntary autonomic response of constriction. Then it was easy to give her another way to trigger that constriction response, so she didn't have to have an image of a strange man looking at her all day long. One of Erickson's clients was a woman